to Color Correction, a Jesus-y podcast about race and faith from the perspective of an Asian guy, a black girl, and
some different white people.
Hey!
So today's kind of weird in that this is a crossover kind of Avengers team up with a bunch of our pastors. Rachel, you want to tell us about Resist and Restore?
Sure. Resist and Restore is our podcast where the pastors of Circle of Hope extend the table of our dialogue. And so we want to do that with you all today and with our friends here at Color Correction. We're so honored to be doing this together.
So today's episode is going to be a kind of combination of different interviews that we had with some of our pastors. How do we want to introduce ourselves? Do we want to go through all of us here now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
I'm Ben White, pastor of Circle of Hope in South Jersey. I use he, him pronouns. That's what y'all say.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'm white.
I'm Rachel Sensenig, and I am pastor of our congregation in South Philly. I am also white.
And I'm Bethany. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a black woman.
And I'm Andrew. I'm Asian. I use he, him pronouns. So you'll be hearing from all of us in different combinations as the podcast goes on. And you'll also be hearing from some familiar people like Kris, obviously, and also Jonny Rashid, who is like the color correction chaplain, it feels like at this point. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about this. Why? So Circle of Hope is one church made up of several congregations in the... What do you say, Ben?
I say Philly Metro, but even better, go with God's plan, Delaware River Watershed.
The Delaware River Watershed. Yeah, I like that when you said that on Sunday. I was like, that's such a evocative way to talk about our geography and where our faith community is. So Circle of Hope is a faith community that's spread into multiple congregations, and we do have 4 pastors. I guess we should talk about why it is that we wanted to do, why it is that... Well,
we're talking about why anti-racism is important to us as a church.
Yes.
And particularly as pastors that are pastoring people of different colors.
So let's, as an introductory way to talk about, what do you guys think of that question?
Well, I come to pastoring out of social work. So I feel like that's part of my journey, and calling to be in the city. And I was grateful to go to Temple. They have a very Afrocentric program there, and so I got to learn under many great Black teachers, and I really enjoyed my work in social work, but the answering the call to pastoring, I really had this hope for more mutuality. As important as social services are, there was this element of paternalism in it that it's just there as an effect of systemic racism. And again, the services are so important and it's such good work. But in answering the call to pastoring, I was really hoping that the church could be an expression of mutuality between people of all races. I think that's still my hope. And I'm learning that it's not just... I think I had this naive view that it was mostly we were going to achieve that by like sharing positional power, that somehow we would be solving racism by doing that. And I think that's really important. And we've got to keep working at that. But I keep learning that it's much deeper than that there's this need to really listen and for white people to understand the Black experience and experiences that are different from their own that we can be so clueless about. And doing the personal work with Jesus and each other to get free of our internalized white supremacy, ways that we've believed these lies about ourselves. It takes a lot of grace, this ongoing renewing of our minds So I'm asking a lot of questions, and I keep learning that every day.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the thing that white Christians often pose when they look at a faith community that is into anti-racism or is trying to stress the idea that Black Lives Matter is, what does this have to do with the gospel? What does this actually have to do with evangelism? What does this have to do with Jesus? Do you think you have a good answer to that?
I do. I
Yeah,
think
go
I do.
for it.
We'll be the judges of how good it is.
Yes. We'll hold up numbers at the end.
Okay, well, I became a Christian because the world sucks. That was my particular journey. Some people, they go the route of I suck, but for me it was like, nah, this world sucks. I don't like this place. I don't like the way that things work. They're terrible. Everything's terrible. Look at this. And so what really motivates me as a Christian is to change the world, to believe in the future that Jesus has promised, and to use all the gifts that I'm getting from the Holy Spirit. It's like being a Christian gives you this vision for another possible world because Jesus has inaugurated it. And it gives you the power of the Holy Spirit to actually not just be stuck in your own stuff. Why wouldn't you use it? Why wouldn't you do stuff like tackle racism or all the other big stuff that the world is heaping down upon us, like militarism and capitalism run amok? Jesus challenges these status quo things, and if we want Jesus to be Lord, this is where it really gets down to evangelism, is that the unexamined white supremacy that wreaks havoc on at least U.S. history. Let's just keep it real small, just real small, less than 300 years of the actual U.S. government, that the havoc that racism has played on that, and the way that racism has become an idol, is a reason that Jesus is not your Lord. And if you really want to be a diehard Christian, like I want to be, like the reason I became a Christian, like that vision that I had when I was 18, you got to fight racism. Because otherwise you're just bending the knee to some other power, and Jesus isn't actually your Lord and Savior.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea. But Beth, were you going to say something?
I was. So I hear that, and I think a lot of Christians feel that. But I wonder what it looks like, what it starts to look like to talk to white Christians about like how everything that they've known to be real is influenced by white supremacy, even the way they relate to the gospel, even the way they picture Jesus and God and the disciples, even the way they relate to other brothers and sisters. How do we start? That's got to be scary. So how do we start talking to white Christians about that?
I don't think it's scary. I think that we might over catastrophize it when we come at it in that angle.
As a Black woman that has had people respond to me from their place of fear of being called out, I think it is real scary for white people.
No. I think you're right, but I'm trying to like take the narrative and say, no, it's not that scary. This is what we're made for.
Okay. Say more about that.
It's stepping around that fear as opposed to centering it. Like essentially, if we center fear, and even if we center racism, as opposed to the transforming power of the gospel, of Jesus's presence in our real lives, like, no, he's got this, he's got and you got this with him. And so I try to not, I think that there is this narrative of like, oh man, this is so hard. And I definitely want to, in person, be gentle with people who are actually experiencing that fear, like you're talking about, Beth, like with the, people reacting in this kind of, oh man, there's some fear in there kind of way. But I think people need more inspiration than they need to kind of, I don't know if we beat fear by looking fear in the face and saying, no way, it's choosing some other path that moves beyond it, or, because if you have to become not scared to do something, I don't think that's a winning proposition.
Yeah.
When I say it's not scary, no, that's not true. Of course it's scary, but I'm saying let's not start from the fear. Let's start from some other place.
No, I get what you're both saying, and I think both of you are addressing something that we've kind of been talking about for the past few weeks, which is people's lack of imagination and the fear that comes from being unable to think past beyond what they're familiar with and what feels safe to them. I mean, what we always run into is this impoverished view of the gospel where Jesus came to save your soul, but he didn't come to save you from anything else. And I think what you're saying, Ben, is that a gospel where Jesus is big enough to defeat militarism, a gospel where Jesus is big enough to defeat white supremacy or economic injustice or the things that we actually deal with on a day-to-day basis, like that is not a gospel that is smaller than Jesus saving your soul. That's a gospel that's big enough to include not just your soul, but everything that we see around us in the world that we swim in. I mean, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what Bethany's talking about is that's hard. It's hard to get people to imagine a gospel that's that big. The idea that Jesus came to challenge, not just to get you to say the sinner's prayer, but also to get you to realize that that you're stuck in the matrix.
We have had 2 nerdy references already. This is delicious.
It's all me. Like that can be scary for people. That's part of what we're trying to do here. I guess, do you guys have any thoughts about that? Like how do you, like, I get what you're saying you want to do, Ben, but how do we get people to see past their fear and to the imagination that Jesus invites us to?
Well, I really appreciate what you're saying, Andrew, because I think that kind of confidence in the gospel does allow us to like realistically acknowledge the wound. I mean, racism is like we can't put a Band-Aid on it. Racism is a giant wound in the body of Christ. And I think Jesus feels that. It's his own body. And so I think when Christians want to just, or anybody wants to just act like it's over, we had the civil rights movement, everybody's, hopefully it's less societally, like culturally accepted to act that way now. But I think there is still the temptation to just kind of put a Band-Aid on it and act like Jesus's work on the cross is like completely over and that there's no more healing work to be done. And that just does more harm, I think. I think there's this call for the church right now to tend to the wound in the confidence that you're describing, that Jesus is a healer and that the Holy Spirit empowers us to like face reality and listen to each other and hear each other and actually love each other and learn and be transformed. That's my hope, that we can do that.
I think I'm kind of just bringing a different energy a little bit, Rachel. Like I'm totally like, yeah, of course we have to address the wound. And the thing that came to mind that might go a lot along with what the energy that I'm thinking about is like racism is a wound that has not been tended for so long that it's gangrenous and it's threatening the whole body, like at least the body politic of the United States, maybe the body of Christ as the church in the United States, maybe even Circle of Hope. And so what needs to happen? This is not a medical procedure. This is not an intervention with antibiotics and maybe some sutures. This is a drastic surgical intervention. Stuff needs to get cut out. And I love my friend Matt, who led in the Sunday meeting. This was more than a year ago, but he had us imagining, and I think I led someone else to do this too. I had us imagining our third hand. Like he had us feeling our hands, meditating on the feel of what our hands feel like. And then I think we were like snapping our fingers. And then he had us think about the third hand in between your left and right hand that's snapping. I know this is so weird, but like that's the kind of imagination that we need. We don't just need a new, like our existing left hand to not be gangrenous and rotten and totally dead inside. We have to cut off that hand and grow a new arm, or maybe some other appendage that we haven't thought of yet. Like some Dr. Seuss style kind of body that's totally different than what we've imagined before.
Yeah, I love that, Ben. The idea that it's not just healing. Maybe it's not just surgery. Maybe it's resurrection. Maybe it's transfiguration.
There you go.
Amen.
Yeah, right?
Reconstitution of every atom.
Cool. So I guess that's our starting place.
I think that's a good starting place.
Right?
Wow.
So there are going to be a bunch of cool conversations here. And then I think the outro of the episodes are going to be different. If you're listening to Color Correction, you're going to hear what we're into. And if you're listening to Resist and Restore, you're going to hear what the pastors, what do you guys call it?
Spiritual show and tell.
Spiritual show and tell. So stick around till the end, and you'll get that. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for doing this crossover thing. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
This is Kris, the white guy on the Color Correction podcast. I'm here today with Jonny Rashid, one of our pastors at Circle of Hope, and my co-host, Andrew. We're here to have a conversation about growing up in an immigrant family in the U.S. and generally white enclaves. I'm excited to have this conversation. I don't know, it seems like a perennial necessity in a country where we are obsessed with the story of all being immigrants, and yet we treat each batch of current immigrants so poorly. So we really have a hard time with our own origin story. I think a good way to explore that is in the personal experiences. Jonny and Andrew, why don't you each tell us where you're coming from?
Why don't you go for it, Jonny?
Yeah, I'm Jonny. Like you said, both of my parents were born in Egypt. They grew up in Cairo. They grew up in the same neighborhood in Cairo. And that's really interesting because this isn't typically the case for in-laws, but both sides of my uncles and aunts on both sides knew each other growing up because they grew up in the same neighborhood. And so that makes a lot of things interesting because they've known each other for their whole lives. Yeah, they immigrated to the United States in the early 80s, and I was born here.
And I'm Andrew. Both of my parents are from Taiwan, the southern part of Taiwan. I don't remember the names of their hometowns. But they also immigrated over in the first half of the decade. So they also immigrated over in the early 80s.
And were you born here, Andrew?
I was. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
Hey!
Yeah. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
That's a funny thing about Andrew because, like me, he gets asked a lot, hey, where are you from? Which is, and the question, what people are trying to ask is why do you look different than me?
Right.
You know?
And who is asking that question?
All sorts of people. All sorts
Really?
of people. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, as long as they're a lot of Americans do it, And Andrew would say, I'm from Cleveland.
I'm from Cleveland.
What would you say, Jonny?
I'd say I'm from Egypt because I'm nice, and I give them. This is interesting because I give them the answer that they want.
Yeah.
Because I can usually discern what they want. Now, what is that? Now that kind of speaks to how I grew up. I grew up in a predominantly white environment, and I figured out how to assimilate in it pretty well.
Yeah.
And so when someone asks me a question, I figure out their answer and give it to them.
Right.
And I don't even feel injured by it immediately. I grew up absorbing those kinds of microaggressions because feeling the pain of each of them isn't a tenable option for me anyway. I won't speak for anybody else, but
interesting. The reason I tell people that the reason I tell white people specifically, because it's different when a non-white person asks you that, but the reason I tell white people specifically that I'm from Cleveland, it is born out of a little bit of kind of resentment and annoyance. So, I also know what they want to hear, but I'm kind of annoyed at them for it, and that's where that comes from. So I think it is interesting, Jonny, that you're able to just kind of absorb that and just give them what they want. When to me, I feel resentful to some degree. I'm not seething with hatred, but
yeah,
sure. I feel that microaggression.
Totally. One of the things I maybe this is nothing, but one of the things I picked up on when you guys introduced your families, both of them came in the 80s. That's one thing, but the other thing, Andrew, is different than Jonny. You're where your parents grew up. If that's information you got, you don't remember it. I'm wondering if that's just them not telling you, or I wonder how that fits in to the story.
Why I don't remember the name of the town?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not that they haven't told me. It's just that I forget it all the time.
Have you been back to where they were born?
I may have been there accidentally, but I've never sought out where they were from.
Mm-hmm.
When we went to Egypt, we went right to the same block they were on, and I was in their house. So
really? The house is still there and stuff?
Yeah.
Taiwan has changed so much in the past few decades that I don't even know if like the places they grew up are like still there in any recognizable fashion.
And that's, speaking to our experience, I know Andrew to some extent, so I feel okay sharing this. Taiwan's, and I think the listening audience probably knows this too, but Taiwan is in an oppressed circumstance in kind of the Chinese empire, you could say.
Right.
And and you're hearing about what's happening to Hong Kong too right now. And so there's a colonial aspect. There's a colonized aspect to, I think, the Taiwanese experience that complicates the experience of an immigrant in the United States, similar to how my parents grew up Christians in a predominantly Muslim country. It's not quite a theocracy, but Egypt's constitution definitely has appeal to Sharia law, so Islamic law itself. So it is definitely more theocratic than the United States is. And so their experience as oppressed people in Egypt colors how they experience oppression here, because it's different. They didn't come from a position of power from where they were. In the United States, at least for my parents, there is a different kind of freedom that they can have here that they didn't have in Egypt. And so their experience of oppression in the United States is colored by their experience of oppression in Egypt. Is that true of your parents too? Sorry, Kris, I'm asking questions.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. Do you mean like they don't experience oppression as racial oppression, or they tend to shrug it off in the way that immigrant parents do?
They shrug it off, but I'm wondering in the way that immigrant parents do, if that's related to the fact that they experienced a different oppression elsewhere.
I mean, I definitely think that's true, but they came up in Taiwan when Taiwan was in a period of martial law, where you could literally go to jail, even though it was technically a democratic government that was in opposition to the communist government on the mainland. You could still, I mean, we had family members that were imprisoned for talking about Taiwanese independence or that sort of thing, or speaking out against the KMT. So, I mean, yeah, if that's the environment that you come from, you're definitely going to, there definitely is a difference in oppressions that you feel. Mm-hmm. Also, like just generally the reputation of the United States as the protector of Taiwan and the great bastion of liberty and freedom, especially for Taiwan as a country, which really, this is a complicated geopolitical thing, but depends on the United States to protect it from China.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. And the United States actually has a similar relationship with Egypt. Egypt gets the second most funding from the United States, with Israel being number one. And the reason that Egypt does is that Egypt's at the table between Israel and Palestine, essentially as a mediator in this international conflict. And the United States tries to keep a friendly relationship with Egypt so that Egypt's role sort of as a diplomat between these countries can continue. So
right. Yeah,
it seems similar to me, Andrew.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and also just the idea of America was there, and also like American culture is exploited all over the world. Sure. I think like one of the things, one of my dad's favorite possession is his revolver, his 6-shot revolver. And I think it's because he grew up like watching Westerns. You're not allowed to have a revolver in Taiwan. Like airsoft guns are big over there because you're not allowed to have a real gun. But my dad came over to the U.S. and his way of experiencing American freedom was buying a cowboy gun. Like not just a gun, but a cowboy gun, because that was the American thing. He grew up with those movies and like, yeah, it's a whole package.
So that's, I mean, one of the basic questions is, why did your parents come to the United States in the first place? John, you kind of hinted at it.
Yeah, there was an opportunity for more freedom, and they thought they would get it here. That was the basic idea.
Was that religious?
Yeah, definitely. It's religious, but it's also the result of a fairly authoritarian country. Opportunities in Egypt for Muslims aren't dramatically greater than they are for Christians, but for Christians, you have an additional level of legitimate persecution. It's interesting to listen to white Christians in the United States talk about persecution, because we've actually experienced it in a more tangible way in Egypt than whatever, I don't know. Yeah, I have a hard time understanding it, even, in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things it sounds like that's different between you and your parents is your understandings of racial oppression here in the United States. Either like you understand it, or you just have a different tolerance than your parents do, or a different perspective.
Yeah, I would say so. But it takes a while. Like I said, the immigrant moves here, and we try to. I mean, at least for me, we try to assimilate as best as we can. You want to fit in, and so I grew up being embarrassed of my difference.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich that I had packed in my lunch is in a pita bread.
Interesting. Okay.
And not on American sandwich bread. That's what we had. So that's what we did. Somehow they got the peanut butter and jelly in there. They didn't get the bread is different.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
those
Like I
things
wanted my
happen.
parents to pack me Lunchables.
So that's the American.
Yeah, because that's what all the white kids do.
Yeah.
So I feel that.
And so there's this feeling of wanting to assimilate to dominant culture.
Yeah.
And you don't realize that you can be different and be empowered. And you don't realize that your difficulty in assimilation or your requirement to assimilate is racism.
Yeah.
And every immigrant, I think, has to make the choice. And I'm speaking specifically to overseas immigrants because I think we have a unique experience here. Do you want to face the pain that it requires to confront this racism, or would you rather just absorb it all and try to live your life with as much proximity to white power as you can?
Yeah.
Because we'll never be fully incorporated. We're not Irish. We're not Italian. It's
Right.
not going to happen to us.
Right.
Right.
And I think it's much easier for second generation immigrants to recognize that than first generation immigrants. I think first generation immigrants, it's easier for them to be like, oh, if I spoke better English, if I got the cultural references, then I would be accepted more. But when you've grown up here, when you speak pretty well, when you know what everyone's talking about, but you still face racism, you can't get around the fact that that racism exists. You can't deny that reality in the same way that you might be able to if you have these other things to blame because you're a first generation immigrant.
And because you're so apparently assimilated, because we watch the same TV shows and we know the same cliches, and I don't even know the cliches that well myself, but when you appear to be assimilated, at least more than your parents, white people don't create a hospitable environment for you to articulate your experience of racism. So when you do, they will say, yeah, but you're not really brown, right? That's not really racism, right? You're educated, you're articulate, you're okay, right? Like that, there is definitely that gaslighting experience to someone who is very well assimilated like I am. And I admit the fact that I'm often more educated and more articulate than my white counterparts doesn't help anything either. It hurts me and it helps me. But there's a feeling of being threatened by that exacerbates racism while all simultaneously gaslighting you into thinking that you're not really experiencing this.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think from an East Asian perspective specifically, sometimes by being educated or being articulate, I am playing into racist stereotypes about my own competence because we get that, and I mean and it's not all
they expect you to be, because that's Asians have a reputation for being smart or something.
Yes, because they expect me to be smart but not very creative or something like that.
So when you play one of your songs, because you're deeply creative, are people surprised that you have such a magnificent voice and ability to write?
I don't know. Maybe thanks for the compliment. I think one of the reasons that I kind of resisted continuing to play classical music, even though I grew up being the Asian stereotype of playing a violin, is because I felt some kind of internalized resistance toward I didn't like people writing off my ability to play the violin as being like, oh, that's what Asians do. So I started doing jazz and folk and other stuff as a kind of resistance to white people's expectations. It's not 100% great. It's a little bit shitty that I had to that I felt the need to rebel against my musical proficiency because of because of the white gaze. But that did guide the choices that I make, and even what music I'm good at playing now.
Yeah. Jonny, what about you? You have any of that resistance?
Definitely. My dad is a physician, and the expectation for me was to become a doctor or an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot, and there's a lot of brown doctors and engineers. It's kind of amazing. I went to a Temple, a graduation at the Temple medical school. Man, there was a lot of brown dudes and a lot of Asian people graduating. It was kind of uncanny what was happening in front of me. So that speaks to oh, you want us to take prestigious positions that pay you and show your education. And I didn't go down that path. I wanted to be a journalist. I became a teacher for a period of time. Now I'm a pastor. which holds its own level of honor as well. I should say that. But
Yeah.
when I decided to not play along with the American idea, that was a big deal in my family. Like, I decided, no, I'm not going to assimilate. I'm going to fight American oppression, and I'm going to name American oppression. It was really complicated for us because in high school, when the towers fell, my dad was all gung-ho, attack Islamists who oppressed him in Egypt.
Right.
And for me to say, no, that's not the Christian way, was a big deal. That was rebelling against him, but also, what he thought was his people,
Right.
And siding with the Islamists, as he would say.
Well, it's a huge rebellion. Like he moved to this country presumably to give you a better life,
Mm-hmm.
and here you are, like, knocking the country he moved to, which is like.
So I'm not sure if I was rebelling as much against my experience among white folks as I was about my own independence to decide who I wanted to be, even from my family. And breaking out of that family system, that enmeshed Eastern-style family system, is a big deal, to break away from them that way.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like you have? You feel like you have broken away?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it took... Yeah, I don't know if Americans really understand this, but it took... Yeah, getting married, getting your own house, your own job, living in Philadelphia for 15 years, right? Being that broken off. My sister still lives within my parents' proximity. She married an Egyptian. They're in this Egyptian-style family. I didn't really conform to that,
Yeah.
And I'm not even criticizing the choice. I'm saying immigrants have to make these choices, which is unique to our experience.
Andrew, I know a little bit more about, like, I know your mom, so I feel like I know your family a little bit better.
Lily was on this show, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we love Lily. Lily Young is a hero.
Lily loves me, too.
I think one of the things that Beth and I are a fan of is how much of a fan of Andrew she is. That's one of the things we really love about her. So Jonny has, like, this breakout story. Like, how do you fit in your family around, like, faith and how you grew up in this country?
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about something that Jonny said. I mean, the choice that your sister made to be more Egyptian in how she lives close to her parents and stuff like that. I mean, that sounds like a good deal. And you said that you're not criticizing that choice, but you did make a different choice. And the different choice that you made, I guess, is like a little bit of like a more Western, independent, separate nuclear family kind of thing.
So there is something to that. I think the standard move for an immigrant when they get to the U.S. is to try to find their people. We try to find an enclave that works for us. If it's just your immediate family and your extended family, that's fine. Like, I'm on a Facebook chat with my Egyptian cousins. We still have some of that connection. But you try to create your own community that's separate from the world so that you don't have to have all the difficulty navigating it.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like my experience was easier than my sister's in navigating it, but I wanted to be free. I wanted to not necessarily be a normal style of the U.S., but push back to a system that made it more convenient for me to be just around people that looked like me, as opposed to confronting the fact that I'm as good as any of you.
Yeah. I mean, the question is tough for me because I have a hard time separating, like, my hang-ups about my family with whatever hangups I have about my family's culture. Like, how much of it is because of just my father and I's difficult relationship is just because he's a difficult person versus it's hard for me to relate to his culture. I do think that at least I tell myself that it has more to do with interpersonal things than cultural things. But I mean, culture is mixed up in there, I think. If I had a better relationship with both of my parents, such that I would be more comfortable, like, doing the kind of East Asian extended family, I think that would be great. Like, if I did that. But I do have a rough relationship with my parents, probably like for a variety of reasons, of which culture might be one of them, but also just, because of other stuff.
Yeah. Are you similarly compelled into, like, enclaves like Jonny was talking about?
I guess Jonny and I, neither of us grew up in enclaves specifically. There isn't like a Egyptian American enclave in Lebanon, is there?
No, there is not. In the Lehigh Valley, where they initially immigrated to, there is kind of more Egyptians and Syrians there for sure.
Huh.
Hey, Lehigh Valley, Andrew.
Yeah.
Same place. We both lived in the Lehigh Valley.
Which has a town called Lebanon, which is in Pennsylvania for people who are listening.
Wait, Lebanon's a different place.
Well, Lebanon's in the Lebanon Valley. But the
Okay.
Lehigh Valley is like Allentown, Easton, Bethlehem. I think
Right.
Andrew, you're from Emmaus?
Yeah, basically, yeah. Technically Allentown. But yeah, I mean, there was a Chinese community there, and probably the hub of it was the Chinese Christian church. And my parents had a conflict with the leadership of that church and left when I was maybe 5 or 6. And after that, that was the last I saw of that kind of close-knit Asian community. From then on, my family, we were pretty much on our own. Because I've always been outside of those enclaves, I haven't ever been able to, like, I've never even had the comfort of that, you know? And also, there's probably a certain amount of internalized white supremacy for me that made me, like, not want to be around other Asian people in an attempt to assimilate more to white people, especially when I was an adolescent.
Yeah, there is definitely something that I think many children of immigrants experience where they're ashamed of their own culture because their culture seems to set them back.
It puts the peanut butter and jelly on pita.
Yeah. And so now I might embrace, the food I grew up in and share it with people, but it takes some resilience to be able to do that. And it takes some courage to be able to do that. And once again, I'm very sympathetic to the people that decide to assimilate versus the ones that decide to liberate themselves by expressing themselves in a conspicuous way. But I think that is just choices that we have to make. I'm sympathetic, like I said. When you say where am I from, I give you the answer that I think you want to hear. And Andrew pushes back a little bit. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about.
Yeah. The particularities around food are, on one hand, like Lunchables and peanut butter and jelly. Those are pretty elementary and adolescent wants to begin with. But food's a real thing, and it's a real kind of indicator of culture. And it's like one of the things that gets explored a lot in popular culture right now is like more and more foods have this emergence. We're like incorporating more of the cultural foods that maybe when you grew up weren't as welcome. We've talked about that even a little bit on our other podcast. I'm wondering if like there are specific examples of that stand out to either of you.
Yeah, I mean the popularity of I call it hummus now, so I've adapted. We used to call it hummus. In our culture is really the amount of baby carrots and hummus is very surprising to me.
Wait, baby carrots are an Egyptian thing?
No, they're not.
Okay.
We didn't dip carrots into hummus before. That's something Americans did for some reason. Like it's like a ranch substitute, which is fine. Like I'm not even judging that much about that kind of appropriation, but somehow it emerged as a common thing in our culture.
Yeah,
that's surprising.
Yeah,
and it definitely doesn't pay homage to any Egyptian cuisine. There's not a lot of sense about that. I could talk about this for a while. I'm again.
Well, you're a food guy on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it. And Egyptians incorporated French techniques in their cooking because of how they were colonized. I still drink English breakfast tea with milk like I'm British. These things are normal. And so that kind of cultural exchange is, in my opinion, relatively benign. When you add power to it, it becomes more complicated. When you add insult to it, it becomes further complicated. So it can definitely go down some weird trails if you're not careful. So it's not always innocent.
Honestly, like I have a hard time recalling what any of my mom's dishes were called. And also, I feel like a lot of the stuff that is popular from Taiwan, I don't know. It's complicated. Also, you don't cook that much in Taiwan because there's so much street food around. At least when I was there. So I don't know. I don't have any good answers to this. Let's move on.
Yeah. So you guys grew up in mostly white enclaves. I'd love to hear anything you have to say about like your school experiences or like social experiences where you were up against whiteness in a real way.
Yeah, like I said, my experience, there's a passage in the Bible that says, now you see only through a glass darkly. And Paul's talking. This is the end of his love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. And that's kind of the immigrant's experience for me in the United States. I grew up in a white environment. Your eyes get opened up to what's happening around you and you realize, oh, they actually hate me. That's what's happening. All these differences that I experienced are results of them hating me because of what I look like. And that awakening to the pain is really hard to do. People should know this in general. For people of color, awakening to the pain of racism is difficult. Awakening to the pain that we were never seen the same is really hard. And it is painful when our pain is displaced by white discomfort, when they awaken to the fact that they were complicit in all of this.
I almost want you to just say that last part again.
You want me to say it again?
Yeah.
it's really painful to awaken yourself to the racism you've experienced, to the fact that people hate you because of what you looked like. And that pain is displaced when you confront racism because white folks are beginning to awaken themselves to the pain that they've caused. And it's very hard to admit that. So I'm both sympathetic as my pain is deepened as well.
Yeah.
Confronting that is really hard to do, especially as an immigrant who's fairly well assimilated, because I can tell you, hey, I experienced this as racist. And I can easily be pushed back into not saying anything at all because, well, I don't have it as bad as other people or something like that.
And do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was great.
It does make me think about like this moment we're experiencing. We're at kind of the crest of one of these waves where people are waking up to the reality of so many oppressed Black and brown people in our country. And like, Jonny, I think this is this displacement you're talking about, like where like there's like this crush of white people that are like on the scene asking in every way, in every forum, in every Facebook group, like, what can I do? And like kind of like reorienting that lens back to them. I'm wondering if you want to speak to that at all.
Give it a shot, Andrew.
I don't know. Like when white people ask what can they do? I don't know.
I want to be sensitive. You know, I have a lot of feelings about this.
Yeah.
It's hard to put myself out there and have people see me. That's what anti-racism work for me is about. I am fighting for a chance to be seen, and I'm trying to share myself. In interpersonal conversations, that can happen more easily than in public activism.
Yeah.
Those two areas aren't so easily bifurcated. But I want to share the empathy that I have with white folks who are realizing and awakening to their own complicity in racism, because I'm awakening to the fact that I experienced it. Because because I grew up in a white environment, because I didn't have that kind of camaraderie that reiterated it for me, or even a tradition from which to learn about how we're treated in this country. You know, I figured it out for myself in many ways. And I'm trying to use that as a way to understand, you know, how slow sometimes white people are in realizing that. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm willing to deal with that is because I don't think we're going to get through this another way. I don't think the revolution is coming. So I think we have to do this interpersonal relating. And it's difficult because I can look at my family members and think, you don't see how they're treating you, do you? And is it my job to tell you to change your mind, to rub the pain in your face, or do I just let you go to kind of keep living your life? I don't know. I don't know what the right thing to do is there.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about like how faith plays into this too. The Bible is rife with commands for immigrants, or commands to people on how to treat immigrants. You both come from families with immigrants in them. You're both people of faith. And I'm just wondering like how what that interplay is like for you. Like, who is Jesus to you as a result of these intersections? Does that matter in your faith?
Well, Christianity in Asian culture has been so wrapped up in white colonization for so long that I think it's really difficult to disentangle Jesus from these white ways of looking at Christianity. For a lot of people, including my family, Christianity was a way back in the 19th century to get access to Western education and services and that sort of thing. And I think that attitude continued, into the 20th century, which is why so many Asian American churches, or churches, that are predominantly immigrants, often have viewpoints that really align with white evangelical conservatism. I think it's because there's this history of seeing Jesus as a way to align with whiteness. Also, there are aspects of Asian Christianity that are extremely, because Jesus is a tool for assimilation, it's used as a kind of bludgeon to see ways of engaging. How do I want to phrase this? I guess if there's one thing that I would hope that Asian American Christians recognize, it's the idea that, I don't know, it would be great if immigrants in general, Asian American immigrants specifically, can continue the work of decolonizing their faith and decolonizing Jesus, and see Jesus as being aligned with them and not with whiteness. I don't know exactly what that looks like in every aspect. I think there are ways of looking at some of these ideas that can potentially be uniquely Asian. I think there are things about the Asian cultural experience that can illuminate things about God that have not been illuminated by like Greek and Roman philosophy and St. Augustine. And having the imagination to explore that sort of thing, I think could be really interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't think hasn't been done quite enough. So I don't know. There's a lot in there, and I don't want to derail us. So those are some of my thoughts as of this moment right now.
Right off the top.
Yeah.
What about you, Jonny?
Well, Jesus was Palestinian. Jesus was an Arab, and so Jesus and I have a lot in common from Jump Street. And the Bible itself is written both the Old Testament in an ancient Near Eastern time and in the New Testament in the Middle East, by and large.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cultural understanding that I relate to the text and to the tradition. It would be great if we talked about that more.
Yeah.
Athanasius was Egyptian. That's interesting to me. There isn't a lot of Egyptian quality to his theology or something like that, because so much of that is developed later with colonization and, the Muslim takeover of the region and so on. But the faith itself has a lot of roots in a culture that's similar to mine. So when I see Jesus, I can see myself too. But I think it's important for everybody to be able to do that with Jesus, and especially for people of color who have experienced so much hatred, to find a love center in Jesus. The place from which I can do anti-racist work and advocate for myself. The reason that I can bear the pain of racism that I've experienced is because I'm assured of love from God. That doesn't take away the pain, but it helps me to endure it as I navigate the really tricky waters of uncovering the pain that I experience while also unveiling it from the people that have participated, maybe even unconsciously, in it. That work of restitution requires, for me, a relationship with God who will ultimately offer restitution and, looks at me and sees me and loves me, So that's the bedrock from which I can do this work. So it's really important to me.
Yeah. Thank you both. There is so much more here than we can possibly get to. I'm just hoping that we together can keep exploring things like this, and this is a jumping off point for people who are listening. We have a rich, deep faith that we're all a part of. I don't know, there's just so much to explore here. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for you both. I'm glad we're in community together.
I'm grateful for you, Kris. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hey, y'all. So this is maybe the second or third part of our joint episode with our pastor's podcast, Resist and Restore. That's also on all of the podcast apps. And I'm sitting down with one of our pastors from the Northwest, Julie Hoke. And we're going to be talking about our experiences with living in neighborhoods that don't look like us, right? My experience is the neighborhood that I grew up in, which obviously by the police sirens going off in the background, I'm not in my little suburban town anymore. I live in North Philly now. But I grew up in a town full of people that didn't look like me or think like me. And Julie is presently in a neighborhood with folks that don't have the same experiences as her, and a bunch of folks that don't necessarily look like her. So I think we're going to start this conversation off by talking about who we are and where we grew up. So Julie, do you want to tell us who you are, your race, if you're married, single? Just tell us about you and where you grew up.
I'm Julie Hoke, and I am a white married woman with 2 children. I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in rural Lancaster, Pennsylvania, on a street of Amish farms, actually. And all of my neighbors were white. And now I live in Germantown, which is in the northwest section of Philadelphia. And it is, I think it's 98% African American.
Oh, wow. Nice. What drew you to Germantown from Lancaster, Pennsylvania? Because Lancaster is like super white.
Yep.
How did you end up in Germantown?
I went to school at Eastern University, which is just outside Philadelphia, and studied social work and got a job in West Philly and stuck around ever since.
Nice. That's awesome. So I, as most people know that listen to our podcast, but this is a crossover episode. So some of you all that listen to Resist and Restore may not know who I am. So my name's Bethany. I'm a Black woman, and I was born in Philadelphia in North Philly. Philly's my dad's hometown. He met my mom in Western PA. They fell in love, got married, and then ended up moving back to Philly about 10 years after that and having my sister and I. So I lived the first 11 years of my life in Philly. However, I was homeschooled. So I'm not your average Philly girl. My speaking style and mannerisms are very much so that of a homeschooled kid. But in sixth grade, my parents, after a few years of living in 90s Philadelphia, where there was a lot of violence happening, and I think now we can better reflect on what was causing those acts of violence, right? Mass incarceration, terrible responses to drug infestation. I don't know if I want to say drug infestation, but yeah, folks struggling with addiction. So after years and years of that, my parents decided to move their two little Philly girls to a small farm town in Delaware, where all of the farms were being turned into suburban developments. But initially, was still kind of a farm town that I moved into. So that experience was somewhat of a bit of culture shock for me to go from Philly, which is a super Black town, to living in Delaware, in Middletown, Delaware, where there's like maybe two Black families and they all marry each other. And that's it, right? So eventually it becomes one Black family. But yeah, I think that was like a really molding experience for me, right? Like I became so conscious of my identity and my body and everything about me as soon as I became not one of the normies, I guess you could say.
And how did you feel about that move, Bethany? You started going to high school, right?
Yeah. So the first 2 years that I lived in Delaware, we were still homeschooled. And then finally my dad was like, all right, enough already. You got to send these girls to school. This is like one of the best school districts in the state. So just send them to school. So I felt more normal, right? Because I was going to school. But I think I became even more acutely aware of the differences between Black education and white education, as well as the way you're treated as Black students in the classroom. And that really sparked my desire to learn more about myself and Black people and the history of Black people, and my desire to go to a historically Black college. Like I knew that I had been surrounded by enough white people in high school and in my small town, and I was determined to go to a historically Black college for sure.
Well, I went to school with all white kids, and we didn't decide to raise our kids in Philadelphia as much as we decided to root our lives in Philadelphia years ago, before we ever even had kids. So my life was rooted here. And so then when we had kids, it was naturally a part of, raising them in the life that we had and in the neighborhood we were in. I've lived in Germantown for over 15 years and have, meaningful relationships in my neighborhood with my neighbors. And so raising our kids here was a natural part of that. We never really considered moving back to Lancaster or out of the city.
Why not?
Because I love living here. Again, because my whole life is here. I know people who, when they have kids, leave the city, particularly for better school districts, like the choice your parents made. But I didn't want to do that. We didn't want to do that, again, because our whole life was here. And we have meaningful relationships where we're at, and we wanted our kids to grow up in Philadelphia with the diversity of experiences and relationships available to them here that were not available to me where I grew up.
It's interesting how Black folks and white folks are able to approach this, right? Because my parents, we're Black, right? And we're like, also kind of heavyset, dark-skinned people, right? So like in the scope of Blackness, I think we're oftentimes viewed as taking up a lot of space. And we want to, and that goes for like my whole family, right? Like all of my cousins from Detroit all the way out to Western Pennsylvania. I think we have always sought to be as assimilated. And I don't think that's the language that we would consciously use, but I think that's what we've done, right? Like we've worked to not stand out because that keeps us safe, right? So in the choice of moving to Middletown for my parents, that was a decision to keep me and my sister safe, both physically, right? Like my house got shot out when I was 5 years old. That's one of my earliest memories. But that
Bethany.
was a choice to keep us safe, right? And I think these choices to keep us safe oftentimes put us in a different sort of unsafe situation, right? Like I said, I became acutely aware of my Blackness and all of the ugly things that come along with being aware of your Blackness in white spaces, right? Like my body is not small enough. I don't think I've ever had trouble with my features, but maybe for other people, like my features are not European enough. My hair is too kinky. Like in escaping the violence that is placed upon Black neighborhoods, we then go into the violence of white supremacy, and we're not safe in either space because of white supremacy. It's not just Black people killing each other. Like Black on Black crime is a farce. It's the institution of poverty and racism. So I say all that to say my parents' approach to keeping me safe did in some regards, but also made me more vulnerable in other regards. So I wonder if you hold some of these tensions in the decision that you made for your children or even for yourself.
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly people who I grew up with think that Philadelphia is not safe and would not want to raise their kids in Philadelphia. And there's definitely violence and evidence of chronic stress and trauma and poverty around me that was not evident around me when I grew up. So you could say that my kids are exposed to violence in a new way because of where we live. But I think that the violence of white supremacy that you identify is damaging and I want to raise anti-racist kids. I want to be anti-racist myself. And that's a lifelong journey. And I know that doing it in proximity to people who look differently from me and have a different lived experience has been a deeply meaningful way for me to learn and listen. And I want that experience for my kids too. Being in a public school and just talking about what comes up and what happens in their day and the things that they face. Sometimes it is heartbreaking for me, but not just for my own kids, for all of our children in Philadelphia. And I think that is valuable, that kind of experience of working out their whiteness in a context where everybody does not look like them is part of their education. And so where, sometimes people think that what the best choice is for their kids, at least white people, I'll say it like this, the way that our parents, look at it or your parents did versus how I look at it as a parent is really different.
What do you think is the best for your kids? Like, how do we come to the conclusion of what's best for our kids and also keep in mind the capacity that we have? Like my parents were able to move us to Delaware because at the time my dad was an engineer and making 6 figures a year, right? Like that option is not every persons,
Right.
particularly like Philly is one of the blackest big cities as well as one of the poorest big cities. So there's plenty of Black folks in Philly whose parents couldn't make that move for them. And my parents had the money and the capacity to decide what was best for us. And that was moving to a totally different state in a new development in a beautiful school district. How do you think white people can approach making the best decisions for their kids and their families? Not everybody's able to have kids, so just families in general, and also invoke anti-racism, but also like hold the tension of their capacity and what they can do.
I don't think there's one right answer for everyone, but that is the question. That is the question to wrestle with. I think it's a myth to believe that we even know the best or that our kids need the best. I'll say it like that. And I
think it's a myth to think that your kids need the best. Say more about that.
Well, I am speaking from a white person's experience. So let me just, again, reiterate that. But
also like a class experience, because I've often like said stuff like this too, like, I don't need to own very many things. I said that to a guy I was dating, and he was like, yeah, I got evicted twice. So I just kind of like things because I've had things taken from me. And I was like, oh, sorry.
Right. Yes. My middle class status, the fact that I am white, and the fact that I've had this conversation with other white middle class families, maybe I'm thinking about speaking to them right now, but lots of people listen to this podcast. Anyway, back to the idea that I think it's a myth to believe that we have to get what's best for our kids, because I think what is best is often really shaped by some of the lies in our society and white supremacy, for example, in my own case. So what I have found is that my kids' experience where they are is enriched by being able to develop relationships with people with other kids, other families that expand their worldview, their perspective on themselves, and are an education in and of themselves, much less what they get in the classroom. So that's really valuable to me. I don't think it's a choice for everyone. I don't even know that I thought we could do this. We've needed a lot of help along the way, and we've found it.
What does help look like?
Through other parents in the school, through friendships that my kids have needed to help them through teachers and parents and neighbors who have been a village for my kids and for me parenting here. So it's possible, but it's also maybe important I don't even want to say that.
Oh, I always say stuff and then we'll figure it out after we say it. So sometimes it's just how you work it out. We're all different and we all bring our different experiences. And I think we live best together when we are open and like invite in the opportunity for redemption, as opposed to treading so lightly that we
can't get it right on our own.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what you were going to say. Maybe you were going to say something super wild, but
no, it wasn't about getting it right. It was just about acknowledging that it might have been the absolute right choice for your parents to move out of the city and get their kids the kind of education that you got. I don't want to categorize any right decision one way or the other.
Well, I like what you're saying about the best is a myth, right? Like a lot of parents function in making the best decision for their kids. And whatever decision that you make is just a decision, I think, right? I think my parents did think moving us to Middletown was the best decision. And quite frankly, it was a great decision. One of the most fun birthday parties I ever went to was on a farm. hide and seek on a farm is amazing, right? Like I learned and had so many wonderful experiences growing up in Middletown. Like I wouldn't take it back for the world. Every time I go back to Middletown, I think I said this the last time we talked, and I'm in a grocery store because it's a small town. I remember one specific time I was in Walmart and I heard Beth. And I turned around. It was one of my high school classmates that I haven't seen in a while. And she said, I knew it was you by your walk. Like, that's how intimately known I am in this small town that, like, didn't see my face, didn't hear my voice, but knew me well enough from high school that I still had the same walk and she wanted to talk to me. I love the intimacy of a small town, even if I was, one of a few Black kids in honors classes, or, one, like maybe the fifth of all time Black cheerleaders on the football cheerleading team. I think that decision was really good, but there's always going to be caveats to the decisions that we make. So can we ever qualify any decision that we make for ourselves or for our children as the best? I think it's about being intentional, like you're talking about being intentional with your children and with your family, and collecting community. I don't know if I want to say collecting, that sounds super capitalistic, but like fostering and growing and nurturing community. I think that's how we make decisions and feel secure in them.
Yeah, it's not just about being in proximity to one another. It's about investing our lives in the people around us and letting them invest in us. And my kids have been blessed by that over and over again, as have I. So I hope that they can look back on their growing up experience and see how important it was, how it shaped them, and love that they got to grow up in Philadelphia. I asked them recently if they would want to move back to Lancaster because I knew we were having this conversation. And they sort of look at Lancaster as this idyllic place, mostly because Grammy's house really is that for them. She organizes everything for her grandkids. But then they were able to say, no, I really like living here. And I asked them why, and they could talk about their friends and talk about their experiences, and that really matters to me. And we wouldn't have known, how it's going to go without sticking with it.
Absolutely.
And trusting that God is providing for that. I mean, this is a major part of my parenting, right? That God is providing and caring for my kids and for me in whatever circumstance we're in. And a big part of that has been through living with my Black neighbors and friends.
And I think what we're getting at throughout this whole conversation is the way white supremacy affects our neighborhoods and our experiences with our families differently. You know what I mean? Like, white supremacy has put you in a neighborhood because of segregation and redlining, right? That history that is predominantly Black, and how that white supremacy, that iteration of white supremacy, affects the way you navigate raising your children and your family and your children's experiences with schooling. Whereas white supremacy for me, that same white supremacy drove my parents to Delaware. And now I have almost collected privileges, but privileges that come at a cost because of white supremacy, right? So my friends call me the white person whisperer, right? White people love me because I'm very good at moving in and out of Black and white spaces as a means of survival. But I lose something sometimes in like code switching for white people. I don't think I would have that skill if I had spent the entirety of my time in Philly. Trying to think, what other privileges have I gained? Just like being able to maneuver even corporate settings, I would say, or like highly educated white spaces where white people will explicitly demean you, like will explicitly try to make you feel like you're stupid. I've noticed with some of my colleagues at work that is intolerable. Like they will quit their job over that. Whereas I'm like, oh, this is normal, right? Like I lose something. I've lost something that I think that this is normal. Where I'm totally comfortable with like, yeah, old white guy's going to talk to me a little bit spicy because he feels like he can get away with it or he feels like he can demean me. I'm used to that. I know how to respond to this. I almost know how to respond to this like the Canaanite woman responded to Jesus in a way that makes people wake up and realize what they're doing, you know? So white supremacy is so sinister, right? And it's infecting all of us. And we just have to name and recognize the way it's infected us and talk about it. And I think we're talking about how it's infected our neighborhoods and how we experience that. Cool.
Yep. And that's a lifelong work for me to keep recognizing it and trying to uproot it in myself and in my kids. And I'm grateful to be in a context of a community, literally my community around me, in Circle of Hope, but in my neighborhood, with people who help me do that, help me see myself just by relating to me.
Yeah, this work is a marathon and not a sprint.
Not a sprint.
Yeah, and we need each other to move through it.
Yep, I'm glad to be on that journey with you, Bethany.
For sure.
This last section is spiritual show and tell, where we talk about what has been nourishing our soul. And we're sharing it because we hope that it will nourish yours too. So who's going to get us started?
I can start us out, Julie. I have been reading this book called God in My Everything, and I think it's so timely for this moment. Because sometimes when I text people, they say things to me like, what day of the week is it? What's happening right now? Because life is so, unstructured in some ways for us right now in the quarantine, in the pandemic. And, this book is about living from our core, like tuning into what really brings us wholeness and connectedness with God, and living kind of structuring our life then around those daily practices, putting in some daily rhythms that help us connect like that to our deepest stuff. And so I'm hoping everybody in our church reads this book, and we're going to have some, the second half of August, to really talk about it together on our daily prayer and in our cell meeting. So it's called God in My Everything by Ken Shigematsu.
Yeah, it's good. I started reading it too. Though you don't have to read it if you're just like reading a book is like terrible to you. And I hope that you change your mind about that. But if that's where you're at, I don't care. Get in on the conversation. The content will be available even if you don't read the book. Speaking of reading books, though, I love to read books. I actually really like to listen to books, audiobooks. I was just out walking listening to What's Mine's Mine by George MacDonald.
Of
Always
course.
George MacDonald with you, isn't it?
They laugh because they know how much I love him, and he was a very prolific author in the Victorian era, like late 1800s, and like a contemporary of Mark Twain, that kind of. But he's Scottish, and this book, What's Mine's Mine. He always just creates these kind of perfect saints that you can admire and you revel in their vision of the world and their uncompromising integrity as very Orthodox Christians, in my opinion, even if they are iconoclastic in their moment. And that's kind of the point. It's to be the kind of saint that George MacDonald imagines means that you're going to be in conflict with the status quo.
And that's what iconoclastic means.
Yes, I might be misusing it, but yeah, going against convention, going against all of the idols that he foresees or prophesies against in that time. But I just wanted to read you one quote just to give you a feeling for it. This is kind of George MacDonald is also he's unapologetic about inserting his morality and his theology right into the book. Sometimes it's in the mouth of his perfect saints. Sometimes it's just this is the truth about reality. And here's one instance of that. Alasdair. Oh man, I can't think of their last name. Macruadh. Alasdair Macruadh. He is the Macruadh because he's the chief of his clan. And this is a quote that I posted on my Facebook wall. Do we still call them walls?
I think timeline would be the term.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's a timeline.
It's unclear whether.
No, remember when it used to? No, remember when it used to be a wall though?
Yeah.
It was definitely at one point your Facebook wall.
Definitely.
All right.
It definitely was.
All right. Here's the quote. All dreams are not false. Some dreams are truer than the plainest facts. Fact at best is but a garment of truth, which has 10,000 changes of raiment woven in the same loom. Let the dreamer only do the truth of his dream, and one day he will realize all that was worth realizing in it, and a great deal more, and better than it contained.
What a word of hope, Ben. Thank you.
I've been listening to some of my friends who have made music for our Sunday meetings online. We started posting the videos of the songs that they recorded on our YouTube channel, so you can listen to these too. Of course, you can watch the whole Sunday meeting. The recordings are there, and you can engage in all that is put together for those meetings. But if you just want to have some worship music on or watch the videos, if you know the folks making the music, it's been a nice point of connection for me to go to our YouTube channel, Circle of Hope YouTube channel, and subscribe. That will help us if you do this. We're trying to access the other features that YouTube will allow when we get more subscribers. But you can scroll down to the worship videos, and that has been nourishing my soul while I do other things throughout the week. How about you, Jonny?
Well, this Egyptian was comforted by another Egyptian this week, and that Egyptian's name is Athanasius of Alexandria. Now, Athanasius is a doctor of the church, one of the key church fathers right when Christianity was forming, and he wrote this very succinct treatise on the incarnation. The incarnation is Jesus becoming human, the Word made flesh. Now, and you can track along with our daily prayer this week to see what Athanasius is up to. But what I liked about the book or the treatise wasn't just the well-formed arguments that he made, many of which preceded later great theological works. Now, and I'm only saying this to the people that would care about this, so if you don't, that's fine. But in his treatise, you can see where Anselm, another theologian later, developed his. And so you can see the blossom, the seeds that Athanasius planted that later grew into trees for these other theological giants. I find that interesting. But again, that isn't what I love about it. What I love about it is that he is able to speak to the people of his time and place about Jesus and the meaning of Jesus, the cross, the resurrection, and his life in a way that really plants nicely into the soil that he's in. And that motivated me to imagine, well, what soil am I in and what am I going to do? How do I talk about this mystery man? How do I talk about Jesus in a way that makes sense? Because Athanasius's formulations, even though they worked in his time and place, don't just translate into this time and place immediately. We have to do that work. And I think that gave me just the motivation, even as a pastor, to keep imagining, what are we going to do to keep planting, Christianity in this time and place that we're in, And I think that the ability to bring the gospel to the present with great flexibility is essential for our faith. And Athanasius of Alexandria taught me that this week. So I hope it nurtures you as well. Again, circleofhope.net/dailyprayerdeeper is where you'd find that.
Thanks for sharing that, Jonny, and writing for us on the Daily Prayer. If you have something that's nurturing your soul, I hope that you will share it with us. You can email us at resistandrestorepodcast@circleofhope.net.
I'm so glad that you're listening to our podcast, and I just wanted to extend the invitation to you to participate in our community in other ways. First of all, if you like the podcast and you want others to hear it, give us a positive rating wherever you listen to this podcast and subscribe to it as well. Another way that you can help us is by sharing money with us. circleofhope.net/sharing is where you can do that. So those are two areas that you can help our podcast grow. If you want to worship with us, we meet on Sundays at 5 o'clock at circleofhope.net/online meeting. There you'll find a link to a YouTube live stream where there's a live chat happening on Sundays at 5. You can always tune in later to catch the broadcast, but it's fun to do it together live on Sundays. You may also want to connect to our cells, many of which are still online, so if you're traveling or you live far away, you can connect to an online cell. Some are meeting outside with masks on, and there's opportunities for you to connect there as well. circleofhope.net/cells has the information you need about that. I also want to encourage you to pray with us every day. circleofhope.net/dailyprayer and circleofhope.net/dailyprayerdeeper have two different prayers every day for you to be enriched by. The one that's just /dailyprayer is for people that are coming into some new faith and looking for a way to deepen it. And for those of us that have been on a journey for a longer time and are looking to go deeper, circleofhope.net/dailyprayerdeeper is how you might do that. I like both of them, and so maybe you will too. Once again, I'm glad you're listening to us, and I'm glad you're connected to our podcast. Hope you enjoyed today's show, and if you did, share it with other people. Talk back to us at resistandrestorepodcast@circleofhope.net. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. See you next time.
This last segment is, gotta do it again, Jonny.
Just keep going. He'll edit it. I think he can edit it.
This last segment is spiritual show and tell. It's a chance where we... I can't even watch you.
Give it more space this time so there's like a big blank. Everyone be quiet.
Put these bloopers in, Luke. Put them in.